Well, let's just get into it because we have two amazing guests today. So let me do my little diatribe here, and then we'll jump into it. So, an interesting day. We've talked earlier about artificial intelligence and AI, and is it good? Is it bad? I mean, we're going to have a show on it here pretty soon. But yesterday, U.S. stocks just tumbled because in China, DeepSeek AI just came out. It is a third of the cost of what Chat GPT charges and Gemini, and everyone's all excited about it. But I tell you, I did a little test yesterday, just asking it questions about, what do you think about, Taiwan China's relationship? How well is the Chinese government doing? And it refused to answer all those questions. So one thing that we're going to delve into a little later is, AI, as wonderful as it is, I mean, when it has censorship involved, and it has its own little biases involved, we have to be aware of that. So that's one thing. Yesterday, we represented the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust, something that we just can't ever forget. History does repeat itself, and so we all should take a moment and think about the Holocaust and remember the Holocaust and what it meant for the world, and the impact that it had on all of us. Trump and immigration. It's one of those things where Donald Trump was trying to put what I would call immigrants on planes, ship them off to Colombia. Colombia said no. I mean, just listen, think about if they just wanted to put people in planes and send them to Nigeria. Nigeria has every right to say no, but apparently Colombia said no. And then Trump threatened them with 25% tariffs. And lo and behold, they agreed to let them in. So, it's going to be interesting. I think that you're going to see in the Trump administration, and we're going to talk about this with our second guest and also with our first guest as well, Trump and his role in the world and what of his actions are, all the turmoil, potential turmoil that he may be causing. And then the last thing, last week I had a gentleman on my show, Mr. Keith Coleman. He was a gentleman who provided energy to Ukraine, helping rebuild all the power stations and trying to make sure that especially as we deal in these difficult months of winter, that there's enough power for all the citizens of Ukraine. Well, he was just hit with a cease stop order because in the United States, the U.S. State Department has put a 90-day hold on all funding for all support for all countries around the world. And so now we can't even build power stations or continue to build power stations in Ukraine. So we're going to see how the impact of that 90-day moratorium is impacting people around the world. So there's a lot going on as always, and a lot to discuss. So let's just take a quick break from around the world with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our first guest. Thanks a lot. Our first guest today, because now we've gone to our hour format, which means that we have two guests every show, which is quite interesting, is Mr. Bruno Kaufmann. Hello, Bruno. How are you?
Hello, Dane. Thank you for having me.
So where are you today, Bruno? You're a world traveler like I am. So where are you?
Today I'm at home in Arboga, Sweden, where I live since 7 years. It's a great place in the middle of Sweden, and from here I watching out to the world.
Is that the place that I came to for your one of your birthday parties?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
That's Arboga. It's in fact the birthplace of democracy in Sweden. Here, the first parliament of Sweden gathered in 1435.
1435, before America was even a country, before America was anything, so it's amazing the world history. Well, thanks for being with us today, Bruno.
Thank you.
So our topic today, I believe, is the state of democracy from Greenland to Botswana. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, my first question is Greenland. Okay, tell us about Greenland, and why would Donald Trump even be interested in Greenland?
Yes, I mean, Greenland, you just have to watch the map of the world, and then everybody discovers this white, big space under the North Pole very quickly. It's Greenland. It's the biggest island on the world. And in fact, Donald Trump is not the first US president who wants to buy or conquer Greenland. Already in the 1850s, American president offered money to the Danes at that time for buying Greenland, and several times afterwards, until the 1950s, the U.S. had interest in getting Greenland. So, I mean, Trump is a man of the past, and he looks to the past, and he likes these kind of things, so he comes back with it.
Well, so talk to us about, how does that actually work? Greenland is not an independent country. It's part of Denmark, right? So Greenland itself can't just decide to become part of America. Denmark has to agree to it.
Yes, in a way. I mean, Greenland is has been a colony of Denmark between 1751 and 1979, you can say. After 1950s, Denmark basically annexed Greenland. But in 1979, Greenland got autonomy, their own parliament, their own government, their own laws. And since 2008, Greenland is de facto in charge of everything in Greenland, with one exception, which means foreign policy and security policy. And in this field, Denmark still has a big say. And in fact, last night, the Greenlandic and the Danish government agreed on a big package for the defense of Greenland, which is in a way a response a little bit to Trump's aggressive rhetorics. 2 billion euro will be invested in new ships, in new drones, in new satellites to survey, to protect Greenland. And for the first time, in fact, in history, this is not done by the Danes for Greenland, but together. Greenland and Denmark are doing this together. So this is a new quality, and in a way, it's this kind of indirect pressure, of course, which the Trump rhetorics have created.
Well, not to spend all our time on Greenland, but one quick question on this. So Greenland, I mean, Denmark is part of NATO. So if there was military action, which I really don't think will ever happen, but if there's military action against Greenland, does that mean it triggers Article 5 of NATO?
That's correct. I mean, Greenland has been all the way since the establishment of NATO being part of NATO together with Denmark. And in a way, Greenland has never been without NATO protection. So nothing changed independently which status exactly Greenland has. What is important is that Greenland really considers to become an independent state. That doesn't mean that Greenland will be able to provide its own defense. Greenland is a country which is so huge, 2 million square kilometers and only 60,000 people. So it's dependent on international cooperation. It's a little bit like Iceland, which hasn't its own army, but which is part of NATO since 1949.
Well, interesting. And of course, you've been to Greenland, haven't you?
Yes, I've been there 10 times in the last 30 years. Yeah. So it's a great place. It's a great place.
This show really should be around the world with Bruno Kaufmann, because even though I've traveled a lot, he's traveled like 20 times more than I have. Very impressive as always. So
not true.
Well, let's talk about. So the next question is, so just give me an overview. If somebody were to say to you, "What is the state of democracy around the world?" How would you respond to that?
I would say it's worse and better than we may believe. I mean, we are always getting these annual reports from Freedom House, from International IDEA, from Varieties of Democracy, from economists, that democracy is on retreat since 2008, when there has been some agreement that democracy had reached its peak in modern times. It is on retreat. And that's certainly true when you look on the national levels, when you just compare nation states to each another, which are about 200 states around the world. But there's so much more to democracy. A lot of decisions are not taken on the national level. A lot of decisions, the majority of decisions, in fact, today are taken on the subnational and the transnational level, which means that also you have to check out how is democracy developing. For instance, in the cities around the world, there are more than 1 million cities which are governed in many ways on their own. There are regions, there are provinces, and then you have entities like European Union, where also democracy has been developing. So in all these fields, which are not the nation states, you can see that democracy has developed, has been deepened, has become more democratic. And even in many national states, maybe more the smaller ones today, because the bigger ones are really looking into this kind of going forward to the past by becoming imperial places where old men are running autocratic ideas. So you have to look beyond this kind of of attention-driven media reporting about presidents who are really in their last years of their age.
Well, I'm getting old. We're both getting old, but I will say that, for the record, Donald Trump was the oldest person inaugurated as president of the United States. He's 5 months older than Joe Biden was when he was first inaugurated. So definitely the oldest U.S. president that we're going to have. Okay, I'll ask you this question up front. Would you consider America's democracy in trouble, or do you think America's democracy is strong and still stable?
I would say every real democracy needs to be in trouble. Every democracy which is valid the name needs to have challenges, as we can see in the United States. The problem in the United States is maybe not really Trump as such or how the Republican Party is behaving, but the importance this US presidency and the United States have in the world. And that's the big problem. I mean, there are many countries where democracy is in far worse shape than the United States, but they are not so important to the world politics. So we have a real problem when the country, which has been in a way the protector of the democratic order in many places around the world, which has been the host of international organizations, the UN Human Rights Declaration birthplace, when this country gets into these problems, as we can see now in the United States, then there is a real problem for democracy globally.
Well, let's switch gears to Africa. Okay, we talk about Botswana. So I want to ask you first, Africa as a whole, where does democracy fit in the continent?
I mean, it's really such a diverse place. It's so many different countries, so many different stories behind. I would say Africa is in fact really the place where democracy has maybe the most potentials to develop in the years and decades to come, because it's a place where the population is growing a lot, where the economy has a lot of potentials, and where you can also see that there are improvements in many places. I have been recently in Southern Africa, where you could see that South Africa, for the first time after the democratization in 1990s, have seen a change of government, a new coalition government, which has worked quite well, where you can see quite a lot of agreement that you have to work together. You cannot just work against another. And of course, there are neighbors to South Africa, like Botswana, which have had the same party in charge for 58 years after independence, 1966. And there was an election last November, just a few days before the American elections, and the government lost. It lost had a very clear defeat, but there was no discussion about staying in power. There was a smooth change of power within hours. So it's a good example that even in Africa, you can see this kind of peaceful change, alternation of power, and you can see that democracy can be a driving force towards better societies across Africa.
Well, but with Africa having the greatest opportunities, which I agree. I mean, I think there's so much opportunity there. Then I guess, with this, I would argue a new world order being developed between the West and Russia and China and Iran and others. Does that make Africa a battlefield? I mean, for all these world powers to play in?
It could be if of course the post-colonial culture of ideas to look for a external force, government to support you is still like the prevalent way of thinking governance. And you see in many countries across Africa that this is still working a little bit like that in the way of, under the name of anti-colonial government, post-colonial behaviors are forwarded. It means especially when it comes to resources, the use of resources. Here again, I would say Botswana, for instance, a small landlocked country, shows that you can be very rich. In Botswana, it's the diamonds, and still use this wealth for the benefit of everybody in the country, for education, for the development of infrastructure. It doesn't need to be like that a certain class, a certain family has to run the game and to suppress the rest of the country. So it's all about this emancipation towards a proper modern representative democracy in many countries. And there are good conditions for that because many young people in Africa, and Africa is a young continent with a majority of young people, they're well educated and they have good preconditions of bringing this great place on earth forward.
Well, what do you think about Nigeria? I mean, since this show is based out of Nigeria, I mean, what do you feel about the democracy and the history and the future of democracy in Nigeria?
I mean, Nigeria is in a way an exemption of the rule in a way that it's such a huge country. It's so big. It's so many people, but it has also a very global connection with so many people around the world. So I'm far from being an expert on Nigeria, but I see a lot of potentials and I see a lot of opportunities there. But of course, as it is now, it's very hard to really get this country on path towards a more, let's say, peaceful and a place where most people really benefit from the energy which is there and from the ways that the country is run. And there are still too many conflicts within the country, still too many, let's say, corrupt leaders around. So it's a hard work forward, but I'm very confident and very optimistic that also maybe Nigeria as a driving force in Africa will get it and will get forward and really drive Africa to a more peaceful and wealthy place on earth.
Well, with the challenges facing democracy around the world, I mean, as a reporter, I mean, one thing that you are one of the well-known reporter around the world. I want to talk about AI real quick and the impact AI has on developing democracies and democracies. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's another step in the dynamics of digitization. I mean, digitization, the internet, all the ways how we can work remotely, how we can interact remotely, has had a lot of benefits for democracy around the world. It gave individual people something in their hand when it comes to information. I mean, the famous example are the farmers in many countries who before were dependent on information of some middleman. Now they know what the prices for the products are and they're able to negotiate in a very different way. Also in many countries, this has empowered women, which before had very little opportunities to be in charge, to be involved. So there has been a lot of benefits. But what we can see today, of course, again, is that new technology is used not just for the benefit, but also as a power tool to suppress, to concentrate power, and we see there is a big battle between the models of how to rule that. And again, what we talked before, I mean, today the world is in many ways run by very old men who are in a way very much educated and maybe also cultivated through times which were much less democratic and less modern than today. So we have old leaders for a new time, and this is obviously not the best fit for making these technologies like AI really useful.
Well, interesting. You mentioned several times about the old people running the governments. I mean, do you think that there needs to be like new blood, and like in these countries, do you think the world would benefit from younger leaders?
Absolutely. I mean, I just remember 35 years ago, when I, as a young journalist, was visiting the Baltic countries, for instance, which at that time still were under the Soviet Union. And then there was this change also inspired by the people movements, by young journalists, by young leaders in the Baltic countries. And in fact, in Estonia, for instance, which was one of the Soviet republics, after a few months after the change, I was visiting the country and I met a young guy of 25 years. He was the prime minister and the defense minister was 23. And all the old guys were just out of power. This change has enabled Estonia to become one of the most prosperous, most democratic countries today in the world. So at some point, you need this change. At some point, you need this new generation taking over. And especially, I mean, we were talking a lot about Africa. This is especially true for Africa, because here we can see that so many young people are best prepared, are the ones who are looking forward, not just looking back.
Well, no, I'm glad you brought that up about Nigeria because, it's a country that's the growth rate, excuse me, the birth rate is so high, you're going to have a much larger, younger population. And I think that there needs to be greater influence or greater participation by the youth. If you were a political leader in Nigeria, excuse me, I get all choked up when I talk to you, Bruno. What would be your advice to these leaders about how to engage the youth in these countries, in Nigeria specifically?
Going local, I mean, really making the local government level, maybe also provincial level, much more powerful, and letting younger people taking over to show what they are going for, because it's the local and regional level where you really learn the dots of a democracy, of governance. We see that, for instance, in a country like Indonesia, which has decentralized in recent decades, and which has become a powerhouse for local and regional governments and democracy. And where you see now, when there was an old general coming back to the presidency, it's not so easy for this guy to just run the whole game, because there's so much local power, there's so much social movements which have grown up. So what we need is young participatory leaders, and we have to support them in many ways, and also allowing local leaders to work together much more transnationally, internationally, and don't just let it don't just let it be with the nation states and all kind of leaders.
Well, Bruno, as always, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. One last question. What is your favorite train in Africa? I have to, because, but just so the world knows, Bruno only travels by train unless he has to travel by plane. I mean, he loves trains. So tell us, what is your favorite train in all of Africa?
I must say that I haven't traveled so much by train. I mean, in Africa, because on one side there are not so many trains as in other parts of the world. You cannot travel from let's say Morocco to South Africa. There were these ideas, but there are new trains coming up. I mean, there is a high-speed train from Tanger at the Strait of Gibraltar to Marrakesh, which brings you there in 3 hours. It's a great train. I also would love, I must say, and I haven't done it, to really travel through the desert of Namibia. So this is one of my dreams I hope to fulfill in the years to come.
I'm expecting the book from you about all trains around the world. Anyway, thanks, Bruno, for being on the show, and I'll talk to you soon.